Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's informational webinar on the 2020 Georgia Smart Communities Challenge. My name is Greg McCormick. I'm the director of the challenge. A few quick housekeeping reminders before we get started on today's webinar. I'd ask that you please keep your audio and video muted the entire time to limit interruptions. This audio presentation and video presentation is being recorded and will be available on our website later this afternoon in case any of your colleagues miss it and would like to review it. It will be available in the media area under our news and events tab on our website, which is available in the chat area at the top. We're going to be taking questions at the end of this presentation. Please submit your questions through the chat area. Please submit written questions through the chat area. We will not be taking audio questions. If you have any questions after today's presentation regarding the Georgia Smart Communities Challenge, you can email us. Our email address has also been made available in the chat area. So I'm joined today by Deborah Lamb, the Managing Director of Georgia Tech's Smart Cities and Inclusive Innovation. And she's going to get us started today talking about the Georgia Smart Communities Challenge. Welcome, Deborah.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you, everyone, for joining. It's a real pleasure to connect virtually. Next slide, Greg. We're going to be going through 3 parts today. The first part, I will cover a general overview of Georgia Smart and what it is, and obviously define some terminology around how we think about smart cities. Second part is Greg's going to go through our detailed application process around Georgia Smart, and then, as Greg says, we're going to open up the chat box for some question and answer regarding the application process and, of course, smart cities and Georgia Smart in general. Next slide. So we wanted to kick off just with some framing around smart cities and what it is. To us, we're defining smart cities as the integration and application of technology and data and similar tools and techniques to improve the quality of life. This makes it very much a continuous improvement process versus an end state, and one in which we very much value and appreciate and harness technology and data, but is not the end goal. And we very much think about this as a toolkit to empower communities. And we describe communities at a very broad level in terms of it being at a neighborhood, a group of buildings, even at the individual level to a broader region. And that's specific because what we've seen is that this is an empowering framework that can really affect communities of all sizes. The other point that we bring out is where Georgia Tech stands in the smart city space, and that's the triangle to your left-hand side, where we think of it as 3 parts. One is the components. So what are your ingredients, your nuts and bolts? This is what I referred to earlier as the technology, the tools, the hardware, the software. But that's pretty limited unless you know what to do with it. Basically the function, how do you harness that and how do you make it work? And then ultimately where it goes forward in terms of the final vision. What is the end state or a new state of innovation and progress for any size of community? With that kind of framework, we went through a pretty extensive stakeholder engagement process throughout Georgia in this early stage where we kind of tried to understand 2 questions. One, if there was interest around smart cities, and then 2, how could we support that interest and really leverage it to the next stage for Georgia's overall economic development? With those 2 questions, we went on to slide 3. And we thought about creating a Georgia Smart Communities Challenge, which is the mission that you see here. And we took inspiration from other challenges throughout the country and all over the world. This isn't certainly the first challenge, but it's very unique to Georgia. in a sense that this is a challenge that welcomes and promotes communities of any size in Georgia to participate. It is one that allows communities to plan and think about their future. And it's about building long-term resilience and partnership to really promote another stage of development for communities. And so that's kind of the mission that we set about doing. And next slide. It really enabled us to think about our three main things around Georgia Smart. Obviously, thinking about it as a continuous improvement process, thinking about it as very inclusive for all communities, but then really looking forward to thinking about how research can be part of this. And this is where we at Georgia Tech thought very deeply about how to promote the best, most innovative, multidisciplinary research to make community impact. And this is pretty unique and something that we have pushed ourselves as a public university to really benefit the rest of Georgia to do. The first part is, there's a lot of good research that Georgia Tech is doing and others are doing, and they may be doing it by themselves or they may be doing it within their labs. So what we're trying to do is encourage them to work together across different disciplines, no matter what school or what college you're from, and then to really think about how that research can work externally with the community to make an impact. We now more than ever think this mission is critical in our state. First and foremost, we want to obviously respect and give a salute to all the first responders and everyone on the front lines during this extraordinary period. We obviously are not, at that point, but we see our mission much aligned in terms of how do we create resiliency for expected and unexpected events, and how can we maintain communities to be having a sense of empowerment around harnessing technology and data that could help them during these critical times, and then at times that might be calmer. And really thinking about long-term development. And so, during this period, we actually thought more about, our role and how we can pursue this. And what we've heard from our Georgia Smart partners and others is that this type of opportunity is now more important and more critical to really build the level of communities that need to get through this and other crises immediately, but also really push them in their next stage of smart development. So we really are honored to be part of this mission and part of this greater commitment to promoting Georgia in their development. Next slide. Themselves, but we put them together and they are committed to doing this work in greater commitment. And so we really want to recognize this is a very unique partnership that we have in Georgia. And again, something that we're sensitive to other challenges that are at the national or international level. The other challenges I think are great, but what distinguishes our challenge is that we have a pretty broad and diverse coalition of partners. I won't take the time to say every one of them, but between the local government membership organizations, our Georgia Power with our utility, with our economic commerce industry partners, as well as our state government agencies with community affairs, as well as tech association and economic development. This is pretty much a comprehensive bench of partners that make this pretty remarkable, and we just want to commend them doing this. Next slide. So this is the third round of challenges we've done. We piloted the first two rounds. We finished and graduated the first class earlier and now are on the middle of our second class. So as a result, we have 8 projects across the state that are pretty active. You can see by the types of projects and the communities that are involved that, they go from counties to cities, large and small, throughout the state, and they're all very different projects based on obviously the community's needs, the partners' abilities, and where they want to prioritize. If you go to the website, you can have a more detailed profile of each one of these communities, including their partners, the corresponding Georgia Tech researcher, and where they are in terms of their project. We can say pretty confidently that at this point, once we graduated the first class of projects, most of the projects have continued into a year 2 and year 3 because of the research community partnership that has gone through. And now that we're in midterm of the second class, you can see the midterm presentations actually along with the slides on the webpage, that all these projects are still going forward even under this extraordinary time. And that's pretty remarkable because, again, it rests back to the partnerships and the people that we're trying to build to work on identifying and kind of addressing some of these key challenges and thinking about how technology and data can address it. So, even despite or in spite of some of these greater unexpected issues that are challenging us, the rock or the foundation of a lot of these projects are still continuing, and an indicator of the success is based on obviously the ongoing work that's happened from the first class into year 2. Some of these projects, of course, go into details. Next slide. But what makes it great is really about the people again. So while each of these projects are working specifically to their local condition or issue, we as the Georgia Smart team pull them together as well for gatherings. So this essentially becomes a cohort and a group where they can share best practices and common learnings across the board. Again, I can give you more details of each of these projects, but for example, in Chatham County, they're building a network of sea level sensors along the coast to address hurricane resilience. This is something that they've done from an end-to-end full life cycle solution, everything from designing and manufacturing the sea level sensor to installing the sea level sensor to collecting the data that sensor is getting back to an open source platform, and then running the analytics that feed back into their public policy. Very much end-to-end. Another really good project happening after the first year that's continuing into the second and third year is in Albany. They have data that they've been able to use to address not only housing policy, but energy policy as well, and thinking about how to think about neighborhood blight, but also thinking about better energy efficiency policies that could affect performance and cost savings. This year's class, we are building a digital twin in Columbus, Georgia, in the Uptown Business District. This is probably the most advanced and probably one of the most comprehensive digital twins at the community level that we've seen. And it's something that Columbus is very excited about in terms of tracking mobility and further economic development policies. So lots of really good research that, these groups do as part of a team, but at the same time, they're sharing with each other through our series of site visits and workshops. And then we have common thematic kind of discussions around data, stakeholder engagement, and obviously funding and financing that affects all of them across the board. Next slide. This kind of lays out in more details of why we think this is a value for the communities. Obviously, the big one is financial assistance. And we've been able to, thanks to the success of the first two classes and through the generosity of our Georgia Smart partners, been able to increase the grant support directly to the community and, of course, the Georgia Tech researcher. We've kind of improved, I would say, each of this programming as we went, because once we finished the first class, we went through a pretty intensive survey of their experience and tried to incorporate as much feedback in terms of what worked and what didn't. Obviously, one of the big things that came out of that is if we had more funding, we would be able to do these things differently. And so we try to provide more flexibility in the funding. Obviously, Greg will go into more detail of this in terms of the match, but it's important that the communities that are selected are committed and therefore can provide additional resources to leverage what we give them. But this is a good starting point. I spoke earlier about obviously the fellowship and the cohort and just getting the additional expertise to these communities. And then, of course, together with our Georgia Smart partners, we provide a lot more marketing communications because ultimately what we want to do is be able to share these good stories and to be able to share these best practices not only with other communities in Georgia, but also position Georgia as a leader in smart community development, not by us through the program, but really because of the projects that are coming out of each of these individual communities. We obviously attend a lot of these different smart cities conferences, and what we see time and time again is that there are, different pockets of pilots or projects coming from one city or another city. Seldom do you see, the fact that we are promoting 8 cities or 8 communities and 8 projects, and they are really acting as a cohort. So it is that type of ecosystem that we're trying to build, obviously raising the awareness of these unique applications and projects, but as a whole, it's an ecosystem that we are creating for Georgia. And we really welcome all of you to be part of this as we grow. Next slide. So the last part of my section is just to give you a series of KPIs or key performance metrics in terms of this value, something that we are conscious of, as we build this program. How do we measure this? What does this actually mean for the communities, and how do you account for this performance and this value? Through our partnerships with our coalition as well as the communities, we've been able to engage with 2/3 of the state. We hope to continue to engage with more, but at the end of the day, the premise and the principle remains the same, which is all communities, regardless of size, regardless of geography, regardless of what their population or economic development levels are, can be smart through this continuous improvement process. And we will go through many different mediums and tools to do outreach. And this is obviously one of them, and we've been resilient ourselves. We usually have a large in-person workshop. Now we're doing a lot more webinars and live streaming and conference calls, and we're willing to work with all of you to get to certain levels of understanding and obviously action. Even if you are not one of the selected Georgia Smart partners, we still want to engage and reach out, which is why we continue to have a monthly newsletter to share with you what we've been learning about smart cities and smart communities, and hope to hear from you as well. Finally, we have a number of Georgia Tech researchers and professors that have volunteered and are willing to work with you on these projects and others. So if you find that you have other opportunities that require research, please contact us because we can help connect you with obviously the best that Georgia Tech has to offer. Next slide. I spoke about data earlier, but data is obviously a key component to the research and what really distinguishes a project that is done hypothetically and obviously a project that really it translates into community impact and research. Through the 8 projects, each project has different data architects and data issues and obviously data standards, but by and large, because of the projects, we've been able to accumulate a whole host of data at the community level for the project, everything from 10 years of utility and housing data in Albany to tracking first responder vehicles in Gwinnett County, to looking at school buses and walking and commuting to and from home to school in Woodstock or in Milton. So lots of different data sets. We are sensitive to data privacy and security per each project, but at the end of the day, we really see data as a tool to harness a better understanding of how communities work and operate, but also a way for us to measure performance across the board for communities. Next slide. Something that we're really proud about at Georgia Tech is that Smart Cities doesn't live in any one school or college. There is no College of Smart Cities or a School of Smart Cities at Georgia Tech, and it has been a very intentional effort that it actually lies across the colleges and across the schools. You have a lot of really ingenious and expert professors and researchers in different disciplines that are doing related work for community impact. And so we've encouraged them not only to think more about how this can be engaged externally with the community, but how they work with each other. So what you see is behind each of these projects, especially with our 8, it's pretty multidisciplinary. It's led usually by one key professor, but they usually pull in professors from other disciplines to complement their own. And the result is a much more powerful way to harness and utilize the research to make the community impact. So it's a really exciting time and something that we are really proud of our Georgia Tech researchers in doing. Next slide. Finally, one thing about the student work. Obviously, we wouldn't be the university if we don't have students. And this is something that we were also cognizant of building is if we are going to be more successful in smart cities types projects, we need to build the next generation of workforce development. How do we groom the next generation of smart cities leaders? And this type of education usually is done best outside the classroom. So how can we give students real world working experience, working on smart cities projects, but at the same time provide a benefit to our communities in terms of getting additional capacity and expertise. And to that end, inspired by Peace Corps and other fellowship programs, we've developed the Smart Community Corps, where students work full-time, fully funded over the summer on the Smart City project, coupled with the Georgia Tech researchers serving as mentorship. And we started the first year with 4 or 5 Smart Community Corps. And this upcoming summer, we're going to have 11. So a huge credit in terms of just building this type of unique workforce, as well as something to recognize Data Works. Another program is looking at 18 to 24-year-olds and trying to improve their data ability to manage and maintain and do the analytics around this type of system. So, 2 different programs, but very much in line with how we think about building workforce and future leaders around smart cities. Each of the winning Georgia Smart projects are coupled with an additional Smart Community Corps member, which means essentially they get an additional resource on top of the financial resources and technical resources that we give them. Final slides. And again, ultimately, this is all driven by people. We are very respectful that, we want to be empowering the communities. We, as the university, along with our partners, can only do so much, but ultimately, we want to make sure we are actively supporting and giving the communities the tools so that they can continue to do this. Obviously, in terms of building stakeholder and capacity engagement, the partnerships, that what we found is that because the year of building a research community project or partnership is so successful, they oftentimes, through a series of many different ways, continue to secure additional funding in year 2 and year 3. And then what we've also found is beyond the project, they start to add additional layers, such as a K through 12 curriculum around the project, or other types of outreach beyond the initial project. So it gets to be its own kind of research endeavor. And then the final slide is that what we've done as a team is taken basically all 8 projects and hopefully this next batch of year 3 projects, and created a field guide, which is basically best practices from these projects and how they can shape and hopefully inform additional communities that might be facing similar challenges or might have similar priorities, and how we can elevate this into a thought leadership guide. So this is a field guide. You can actually look at it online as well. We have print copies, and we would be happy to mail it to you if you want. But this is really our next stage of development, something that we're working with Professor Chris Lodantic on in terms of what are some best practices, some common themes across all 8 projects and additional communities that we can take away and we can distill these learnings going forward. I'm going to stop there and let Greg go through some more details of the application process. And I see a number of questions, and I think after Greg goes through the application detail process, we can kind of answer all those questions. But thank you for typing your questions, and I hope we'll have time to discuss in further detail after the application process.
Thanks, Deborah. Really appreciate all that great information. So we're very excited to be having the 2020 Georgia Smart Communities Challenge, our 3rd round of this challenge. The RFP just opened a couple weeks ago, so this is very new. The website there shown on the slide, that's our homepage. You can go there and get all the information you need from that page. There's a couple of menu items and different areas that you can select. But the official RFP is our Georgia Smart Program Guide, which is available right on that main homepage. Kind of in the middle of the page, there's an important information section, which includes a link to that. And this important section here now shown on the slide, right here in this top area where it says Georgia Smart Program Guide, click on that and you'll download a PDF document. It should be a very thorough guide, goes through all the important dates, all the important information, the template outline for the RFP that you need to complete, and hopefully answers a lot of your questions that you may have. If it does not, please check out our FAQ area, our frequently asked questions here, also linked to right in that important information section. So important points that I just want to point out. We've increased the grant funding this year from $50,000 up to $100,000, or really anywhere in between, depending on your project scope that you'd like to submit for. And we've also doubled the potential pot for the Georgia Tech research funding from $25K to $50K. So we're very thankful for our partners and sponsors to be able to increase the amount of grant funding available this year. And we're going to be selecting between 2 and 4 teams. The previous 2 years, we've selected 4 teams. We're going to be looking again to select up to 4 teams this year, so we're very excited about that. Just want to reiterate what Deborah has said, is that this project is all about a partnership between Georgia Tech and the community, and particularly a partnership between a researcher or a research team and the community. So When you submit your application, you must have already formed a partnership with a Georgia Tech academic or researcher prior to submitting your application. It's very important that you've already established that partnership and that individual has worked with you to craft the proposal, the RFP, before it comes to submission. There are a number of ways of forming that partnership, of which I'll talk about in just a minute. We have an example template for you to use, so you can view it and download it here in this important information section as well. And we also this year, for the first time, are opening up a pre-proposal submission portal. It's just a 2-page kind of an outline of your project. And what we're going to be doing with that is helping to connect you to Georgia Tech researchers. So you don't have to have a Georgia Tech researcher already established at that point. And you will submit to us kind of an outline of what you think your project could be, and the areas that you think you would be interested in for the research component, and we'll work with you in order to match you with a Georgia Tech researcher to finish your proposal. So some key challenge dates. The challenge launched March 17th, just a couple weeks ago. Today is our first informational webinar. If you missed this webinar today, there's another chance for a live webinar. Should be approximately the same material, maybe a few additions or subtractions depending on the types of questions that we get from people, but a second chance webinar will happen April 28th. But before that, your optional pre-proposal, again, I will say optional, you do not have to submit a pre-proposal in order to submit an application. But if you do choose to submit that pre-proposal, that's due on April 24th. And once we get that from you, we'll work with you to match you with a Georgia Tech researcher based on the type of research and the type of project that you would like to propose. So we'll work to find a researcher that is doing types of research in that same area that you're interested in. Then applications are due June 12th. They will be reviewed and scored, and winners will be selected and then announced in summer of 2020. And then projects will kick off in September. So some key requirements. Some of these have already been outlined, but just want to make sure that you are fully aware of them. Projects must be led by a local government entity in the state of Georgia, and you must have a formal letter of support from a community leader. So if you're a city or a county or a CID, you must get approval and support from a high up community leader. So a county manager, a county CEO, a mayor, someone like that who shows that you have the support from that local government entity. And that's very important because we are asking for a cash and an in-kind match. So it's important that those resources and funds are available within your community and that you do have approval to use them on this project. I've already touched on this several times already, but you must have a Georgia Tech researcher that's partnered with your project in order to submit a proposal. And then also we're looking for verification of the documentation of the source of funds for the community, and that's why it's so important that you have support from the county or city high up government entity. So the Georgia Tech Research Partner requirement, there's a couple of ways that you can get matched with them. One is you can submit this pre-proposal that I've already outlined, but you can also just go to our website. Here's a link to our research faculty bio page, and there's over 50 researchers that have expressed interest in the Georgia Smart Communities Challenge and have a desire to partner with you as a community in the state of Georgia on smart communities topics. So please go to that site and check it out. You can search for different areas of interest or areas of research and see who pops up. And then feel free to reach out to those individuals through email or a phone call. But if you would like us to help broker that relationship, we are happy to do that. And we can do a much better job if you do submit a pre-proposal, because then we will understand your desired project a little bit better. So a couple more RFP recommendations. This project really is all about partnerships. This isn't just your normal grant where your community wants to receive funding to hire a consultant to do a study on X. This is all about a partnership between Georgia Tech and the community, and a partnership within the community. So we're hoping that you establish relationships within your community as well, to NGOs or other government departments. And if you do that, we would like you to include other letters of support or letters of understanding within your application appendix. We also obviously want this Smart Communities project to address some community need. You know your community's needs best, and we want those topics to be inclusive and think long term. We also do not want your project to simply be the purchase of some technology or some hardware or some piece of software or a database or something like that. That can be a piece of it, but only so much so that it is a pilot. You can buy a couple of sensors and install them and test a network, or test the data being gathered from them and the analytics that you're performing on them, and the type of information and knowledge that you're gaining from that. But we don't want you to just go get the grant and hire some company to go install 50 traffic light communication boxes or something like that. That's not the purpose of this grant. So in years past, there's kind of been, or there has been, two sources of funding, and that continues for this year. And we're trying to be a little bit more explicit this year in making sure that communities who are interested in Georgia Smart are aware. So these regions are within the Metro Atlanta community and outside the Metro Atlanta communities. And depending on where you're located, where your community is located, we have different pots of money that we are using to fund your grant. So the requirements are slightly different depending on where your community resides. So if you're in Region 1 and you're outside the Metro Atlanta region, the grant funder is Georgia Power. And your topics should be focused in the smart resilience space, so in data and energy equity, sustainability, those kinds of topics. The program guide goes into more detail on the types of acceptable topics. But if you're within the Metro Atlanta area, the grant funder is the Atlanta Regional Commission, and it's their Livable Centers Initiative. And you can see there on the map on the right-hand side, the orange area is what defines as the Metro Atlanta community. So it might be a little bit bigger than what you're used to thinking about Metro Atlanta, but that's because it's defined by the Atlanta Regional Commission. And those funds are coming from the federal government, so it's U.S. Federal Surface Transportation Block Grant. So if you're familiar with that or have applied for a grant from ARC before, there are some additional requirements that are levied upon you. And if you are in Region 2, your topic is going to be limited to more transportation-related topics. So specifically, I think there's already been at least one question regarding the funding and the match. Both regions will receive up to $100,000 of a grant, which will comprise 80% of your total project amount. So the other 20% must be provided by your community in the amount of a cash contribution. So if you want to receive the full $100,000 grant that we're offering, your community must match $25,000. If you want to offer, or if you want to propose less than $100,000, such as $50,000, then your 20% community match would obviously be proportional to that. If you're in Region 1, we are requiring that you also submit an in-kind match of a minimum of 20% of your project total. For Region 2, because it's going through the Atlanta Regional Commission, the in-kind match is voluntary, but we do strongly recommend that you do submit a match as part of your project, or an in-kind match as part of your project. And lastly, we just do want to be clear that the Georgia Tech research funding that's supplied to your Georgia Tech research partner is not funded from any of these pots of monies here on this page that I just mentioned. That is an additional up to $50,000 that Georgia Tech supplies directly to the research partner. So it does not come out of your grant funds or out of your community match funds or out of your community in-kind match funds. And just real quick, just to make sure this is crystal clear on the funding, if the grant is $100,000, that's an external funds coming to your community. Your community must cash match $25,000 for a project total of $125,000. If you're in Region 1, you must bring a community in-kind match of $25,000. Region 2, that's voluntary but highly encouraged. And then the Georgia Tech research support is also external funds in addition to the $100,000, and that's coming directly from Georgia Tech to the researcher. So a few more specifics on Region 2, so metro communities that are interested in applying for Georgia Smart. So projects obviously must be studies or non-capital investments. They must be transportation related. Invoices are paid by the Atlanta Regional Commission. For Region 1 communities, we will be sending you a check at the start of the project and at the midpoint of the project. So the reimbursement here for metro communities is slightly different. You also have to sign a contract with the Atlanta Regional Commission as well as Georgia Tech. Region 1, you just have to sign a contract with Georgia Tech. And also the Atlanta Regional Commission will be reviewing and approving any RFPs that you have to go out for subcontract or consultant work. And any of those RFPs that go out must be approved by ARC, and there can be no sole source. So you have to put that out for bid. There's also some additional communication between the Atlanta Regional Commission and your project team that will happen throughout the year, as well as all the communication that will happen between the Georgia Smart team here at Georgia Tech and you. And I put up there Lizzie Sandlin's email address at Atlanta Regional Commission. She's actually on the line today, as well as Amy Goodwin from ARC, who'd be happy to answer any specific ARC contracting or questions related to being in Region 2. So we do hope that you use the template that's been provided to you to fill out your application and your pre-proposal. They're available in that important information section right on our webpage. They're downloadable and available as Microsoft Word documents. So it'll make your life a lot easier if you just use those. It gives you all the sections that we're looking for and all the appendices that we're looking for as well. So the application submissions, there's two portals, one for the pre-proposal and one for the application. The links there are for each one. We're using Qualtrics. It's just an online submission portal that you can submit to. The pre-proposal is a 2-page limit and is due April 24th by 5 p.m. And then the full application is a 12-page limit, not counting the appendices, so you can have as many pages and appendices as you would like. That's due June 12th. And both submission portals, as I said, are shown here on this slide, as well as on our links to our website. So you can get to those submission portals, go to our homepage, and you'll at the very bottom, there's an apply here section, which links to these areas. So if you do have any questions, obviously we'll take your questions here very shortly in this presentation. But if you have additional questions, you can email us, sci2@gottech.edu. Please do read our FAQ first and go through the program guide. And you can also ask questions directly from the homepage of our website, shown in the diagram here on this page. There's an Ask a Question form that you can fill out and submit to us. So lastly, just some other events that are happening here on our side at Georgia Smart. On April 14th, we're having one of our researcher webinars. So Professor Arti Rao, who's working with Macon-Bibb County is one of our 2019 Georgia Smart communities. She's going to be presenting her research and how she's working with Macon-Bibb County this year. So please don't miss that. That's April 14th at noon. Then we're going to have another one of these informational sessions for the Georgia Smart Communities Challenge on April 28th. If you miss this one, it's another chance for you to be live on the line and ask in-person questions, or webinar questions at least. And then we're going to be having our fall workshop on September 10th. We unfortunately had to cancel our spring workshop, where we normally give out a lot of this information regarding the Georgia Smart Communities Challenge, as well as bring you in to hear from our Georgia Smart communities at the midterm of their project, giving presentations. We did all those presentations virtually just a week or so ago, so they were all recorded and they're available on our website to review. But we do hope that we'll be able to have you with us here in the fall on September 10th for our fall workshop. So that concludes today's presentation on the Georgia Smart Communities Challenge opportunity for 2020. We're now going to open it up for questions, and I know there have already been some questions that have been typed in the chat area. Again, please use the chat area to submit your questions. It's going to be a lot easier to take your questions written than it is to try to mediate people talking. So I'm going to scroll back up to the top and try to see where the first questions are.
Greg, I'll take one of these questions. So there's a question about the size of the community. You know, what's the smallest size and what's the largest size of the community? And the answer of that is we're very open. I mean, it goes back to what we think about smart cities and smart community development is all sizes of the community. The smallest population-wise, if you're just looking at population of the communities, both Milton and Woodstock for this year's class are relatively small. I think Milton has about 25,000 people. Or Woodstock has about 25,000 people, and Milton is within the 35 range as well. So these are relatively small communities. Largest, we had Chatham County, which was 1 million plus. So there are ranges in terms of all sizes, and we're very flexible for that. We recognize that there are some small size communities, and that means that it changes the scale of the project, which also gives us more flexibility in the funding, which means that we have up to 100K. So if you're a smaller size community and you think that you don't need 100K, you might need 50K or 25K, then you can apply for that, and then you can match accordingly. So we provided some flexibility based again on the feedback, but also recognizing the different scales and types of projects that are out there. Now, on a similar note, you can also apply at that regional scale. So there's some questions if a few communities can join forces and apply, and absolutely. The criteria that we have is that it's important that it's led by one main community, so we kind of have that funding conduit, if you will. And then, it's great if you can have a few communities join forces and do something, again, recognizing the flexibility of that. So definitely large communities, more the regional scale, yes. Smaller communities, a much smaller scale, yes. And everything in between. We are flexible both in terms of that funding and in the application process. Now, if you have a bunch of communities applying, obviously we do want to make sure there's commitment across the board, and so we'll need to look at the corresponding letters of support and really showcase that true partnership that you are saying that you are doing together. So we'll be looking at those a little bit more.
Thanks, Deborah. So I'm just going to start at the top. There was a question regarding the flow on the Smart Cities Framework Triangle. We really look at the development of a smart city as a process. So there's no particular flow or movement throughout that triangle. It's really a process, and that's why it's a triangle with arrows going in all directions. So not really an answer to your question, except that we believe it's a process, and so looking at it and evaluating a project and moving forward to become a smart community in that way is the way that we look at it.
Well, a couple more things to add to that is, Nisha, this is very much about what are the components or parts that is needed for a smart community. And what we've seen is that if you're missing a part, you can't really seek the true value of a smart community. So you have a lot of so-called smart communities development that are so focused on the components. So they secure the sensor, or they secure some sort of fancy technology, and then through that they think they meet their vision, which is they're going to be smart. But that does not work, because if you don't know how to apply that sensor or the function of that sensor, then you're really missing a key part of it. And so we really think that it's important to have all three of these parts in order to think of it as a smart community process. And again, these parts can evolve, the vision can evolve. You might think of better ways to apply the sensor. You might have different tools with new emerging technologies coming, but ultimately you need to have these three parts.
Thanks, Deborah. Going down from there, I think we've answered a number of these questions already. I see a question asking if there's any preference for any particular topic, such as environmental justice. The short answer is no, as long as your topic falls within the areas that we're looking for, so either sustainability and equity or transportation. We're not making any preference or higher ranking for any particular area over another.
And let me just add that the themes are very broad purposefully, especially for the communities in Greater Georgia. And so these are the communities outside the ARC Metro Atlanta. We really encourage and have a wider umbrella of acceptance of projects, which is why we call it smart resilience. So especially for the current times, if you think that there is some important research or opportunity that you're seeing that you might not have seen, a few weeks ago, this could apply to you. And we've kept it fairly broad because we're trying to capture this larger flexibility. And to us, as long as you are utilizing the triangle that we talked about, thinking about what new and emerging technology or tools or data, what kind of research that can be done to address a problem or prioritize an issue around this very broad theme, it does really match what we're thinking. Just one quick question. I see that there's a question about the deadline and adjusted. So we have already adjusted our time frame due to this. So we were a little bit ahead of the game in terms of our adjustments to this. Obviously, we're still monitoring this live, but that is why, due to the current situation, we are, one, providing more of this virtual communication outward. We're happy to get on calls and do more virtual communication if you have more specific questions. But two, add in the pre-proposal process, so then you get some feedback. The pre-proposal process is voluntary. It should only help you. If you feel you don't need to do a pre-proposal and just want to focus on the full proposal, by all means, go for it. But the pre-proposal is very much just another way to communicate and see how we can support you. But finally, we've extended the deadline already as part of this launch to mid-June, accounting for this. And we worked really closely with our Georgia Smart partners, especially those that are on the ground in the communities and are sensitive to what we're hearing in terms of where the time is and where the crises are for the extra room. So certainly we have accounted for the current situation and have adjusted our deadlines and timeframes accordingly. However, if there are, again, unexpected things that should happen, we are certainly open to adjusting this. Or, if you have further questions or a further barrier personally about this deadline, please shoot us an email and we can have a chat about that, especially if you explain what exactly that barrier, that deadline is. But by all means, the timeline has been adjusted to account for new ways of working, as well as just the time sensitivities to everyone's schedule.
Thanks, Deborah. There was a question from Nick Deffley. Hey, Nick, welcome. Nick's with the City of Savannah. He was part of the project in 2018, and he's asking, can previous smart community recipients or municipalities apply again? The answer is yes, so feel free. We look forward to hearing from you. Next question, what is the URL to download this document from? If you go to smartcities.gatech.edu/media, and here at the end, I'll type that in when I have a second to type that in, but that our media area is where you can download this presentation and rewatch this video that will be up later this afternoon. Another question, can teams leverage data from prior challenges? Absolutely. That would be our biggest wish for all of this, is we're hoping to make this a community effort to improve communities throughout the state and throughout the country. And if you're able to use data from prior smart cities projects here, that would be fantastic. We would love if that would happen. So yes. Since regional applications are eligible, would funding amounts change for larger communities? The answer is no on that one. The amount of money available for the grant is a fixed amount up to 100K. So that's the amount available to a winning community. I think that was all the current questions. The other ones I believe have already been answered. If I'm wrong, please type in your question again, or please feel free to submit any additional questions. We have just a couple minutes left. All right, I'm not seeing any additional questions. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. We really hope that you decide to apply, and we'll look out for you. And if you do have any additional questions, feel free to email us, sci2@gatech.edu. I'll type that in again for anyone who needs it. And then the link to the area where you can get to this, I'll type that in right now. Hopefully that's all spelled correctly. Great. Deborah, anything else you want to say?
No, so thank you again, everyone, for joining. And again, we understand that this is a unique time, so feel free to email us and reach out to us if you have any specific questions or you want to talk through something. We're really here to support you, and we really encourage you to use this as an opportunity to address some critical strategic planning issues, but also have the flexibility with what you're seeing right now as well. So thank you, and feel free to connect again.
Thanks, Deborah. It looked like there might be one more question. Curtis, feel free to type that in real quick. Or if it is the last question, I guess feel free to unmute yourself and let us hear from you. Yes, go ahead, Curtis. Thank you.
My question is this grant, can it be used for parks and recreation?
There's no particular restrictions.
Curtis, I suggest that we probably get on a call. It seems like you have a more specific question for your project, and we might want to, just for time's sake, we can do a deeper dive.
Okay, that would work for me.
All right. And same thing, like if any of you have a specific question about a project idea or something that you want to go into further, please reach out to us, submit a pre-proposal, because this is where we can work with you to identify the right research partner from Georgia Tech and, craft, further develop the proposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Curtis. Thanks, Deborah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. and we hope you have a great afternoon.